Hello students, welcome to this course of Bridge Course in Mathematical Physics. Those students who will be taking science in class 11 for physics, for learning physics, we know the language of physics is essentially mathematics. So that is why you need to understand some mathematical aspect of physics before you move into the course of physics of class 11th. Now we will start with a chapter called functions. So first of all, what is a function? Remember, in physics, function is something which is dependable. So if you find any variable which is dependent, is of course called a function. Any variable which is independent cannot be called a function. For example, time. Time is not a function basically. So since it is independent, because most of the things in our day-to-day life will depend upon time, and time does not depend upon any physical quantity. So that is why we can say time is not a function, but anything that depends upon time is a function. For example, velocity is a function of time. So velocity is a function of time. This means velocity is actually a function. And in this case, we also know that there are two types of variable. One is independent variable, another is dependent variable. So independent variable graphically is always drawn on x-axis and dependent variable is always drawn on y-axis. So basically, whenever you see a graph, most of the conventional methods that we use for drawing graph is independent variable on x-axis and dependent variable on y-axis. And wherever you see any graph in physics, chemistry or even in biology as well as mathematics, you should understand that anything which is given on the x-axis will be independent and on the y-axis will be dependent. For example, you have learned in lower class, if I draw a velocity time graph. So this is a velocity time graph. So here velocity is changing with respect to time. So velocity is changing with respect to time here. So that is why velocity is a function of time. So this is just a basic idea of what function is. I have written here one equation. Fx means function of x equal to t square plus 2t plus 3, means x is a function of time. Now moving ahead, there are mainly four types of functions that we will come across mainly in physics. Algebraic expressions, trigonometric expressions, exponential functions and trigonometric functions. Now out of these four functions, trigonometric function can be further divided into periodic and non-periodic. We know periodic function means any function which is repeated after equal interval of time. For example, sin 2 pi plus theta will give you sin theta, and similarly cos 2 pi plus theta will give you cos theta. And non-periodic function means which is not repeated after equal interval of time. So sin 90 minus theta, tan 90 minus theta will give you cot theta, sin 90 minus theta will give you cos theta. So this is not repeated after equal interval of time. So this is non-periodic. Physically, we can relate it to, for example, Earth moves around the Sun is a periodic motion which can be represented by sine or cosine function. Similarly, any non-periodic other functions will be non-periodic function. Rotation of the Earth on its axis is also a periodic function. Now, if we try to draw the graph of sine and cosine function, you can see the sine function starts from the origin 0. Simple reason is sine 0 is 0. But when we try to draw graph of cosine function, it should not start with 0. So it is something like this. So it is starting from some value. Why? Because cos 0 is 1. So we are starting with some value which is not 0 on y-axis. So this is the way we draw a graph for sine and cosine function. Now coming to algebraic functions, you are already familiar with many algebraic expressions from class 9th and 10th, like you have studied polynomials, you have studied linear equation in two variables as well as one variable. So in this case, you have also studied the graphs in class 9th and 10th, where we have drawn graphs using coordinate system for equation of line. Suppose we have an equation like x plus 2y equal to 3. Another equation, suppose 2x minus y equal to 3. So we can find out the values of x and y and we can draw a graph. So this is what you have learned in class 10 already. So that is why I am not going to discuss in detail about algebraic expressions. And trigonometric expressions, of course, trigonometric functions you have already learnt in some basic idea. You have some basic idea about trigonometric function because you have done trigonometry in class 10. So here we have to understand that it can be periodic and non-periodic function. Now what is exponential function? Exponential function simply means, suppose I write y a to the power x. So in this case, this type of function is called an exponential function. So exponential function means it will increase exponentially. For example, the growth of population of a town can be an example of exponential function. During COVID, suppose in a particular month, the number of infection increased drastically. So that was also an example of exponential function. Logarithmic functions or exponential functions are just inverse of each other. But we should remember that when we try to understand this exponential function, we should remember that here here a cannot be equal to 0 and a cannot be equal to 1 as well. Means a should be greater than 1. Why? Because if I put here 1 and then 1 to the power 100 is nothing but 100 only. So it has no meaning. So that is why when we put this exponential function, a should be greater than 1 and it cannot be equal to 0. Now that is exponential function. Now when we try to draw the graph of an exponential function, it's something like this. It looks something like this. Let me draw that particular graph for exponential function. So I am drawing the graph of exponential function. Here the graph is very close to x-axis, but it should not touch the x-axis. So say y equal to a to the power x. So this is a graph of exponential function. So remember, the graph of exponential function should not touch x-axis because it approaches x-axis. Why? Because if it touches the x-axis, then in that case the value of y will become 0. In that case the function does not exist. If y becomes 0, then the function does not exist. So that is why whenever you see this kind of graph, you must understand that this is an example of exponential function. And similarly, we can also draw graph for logarithmic function. So for graph of logarithmic function, it looks like this. It is very close to y-axis, but it does not touch y-axis. So again in this case, as I said, this is the y-axis, this is x-axis. As you can see, the graph is very close to y-axis, here negative y-axis, but it does not touch y-axis. It should not touch y-axis. So these are the graphs for exponential function and logarithmic functions. These graphs will be very useful while learning the subject physics, and not only physics, it is very useful of course in chemistry, as well as sometimes you require graphs in case of biology and other statistical subjects as well. So that is why basic learning of mathematics is very important. So this is our first chapter where we are basically discussing functions. So remember, anything which is dependent is called a function, and which is independent cannot be called a function. I can also give you few more examples. For example, if water is flowing through this pipe, suppose this is a pipe through which water is flowing. So you will learn in class 11 that here the velocity of water will be maximum, and as we move away from the axis, and very close to this side of the pipe, you will find here the velocity of water will be 0. Here the velocity of water will be 0. Now this means the velocity is maximum at this point and decreasing as we move away from the axis. So again here velocity is a function of this particular radius. So here velocity is a function of radius. This means velocity is changing with radius. Acceleration due to gravity is changing with height. So we can say acceleration due to gravity is a function of height. And in some cases you will also find height is a function. So it is also possible that a particular physical quantity, otherwise a function, but when we compare two physical quantities, there one will be a function, means independent variable, dependable variable and other will become independent. As I gave you the example, variation of gravity with respect to height, here gravity, acceleration due to gravity is a function of height, but at the same time height is a distance, and if we draw a distance time graph, so it can give speed. So in that case, distance is a dependable variable and time is an independent variable. So all the time you will find time as an independent variable, but in other cases it is possible that other physical quantity may exist as independent as well as dependent variable. But remember, we can understand that this is a function only if it depends upon something. So if it is independent, then of course it is not a function. So this is just a small idea of what is function. And moving ahead, we will be moving to the second part of this video, limits. So for that, completely watch the next video and subscribe to this channel, because I will be covering up the entire bridge course in mathematical physics absolutely free of cost, and this will help you to develop strong knowledge in physics. If you really want to crack exams like JEE Mains, JEE Advanced, NEET, you need to develop this mathematical idea and the connectivity with physics, because a mathematics teacher will always tell you what exactly is function in terms of mathematics, but I am going to discuss here functions in terms of physics. So in the language of physics, function is nothing but a physical quantity which is depending upon something. Like force may depend upon time. I am applying force on a wall, but I cannot apply the same constant force for a long time simply because I will get tired. So once I get tired, the force, the magnitude of the force will decrease. And on that time, we can say the force is depending upon time. So remember, function in the language of physics is nothing but a physical quantity which is depending upon something. Thank you.